Welcome to the Power of Babble, the podcast where nothing's off the table. From Bible mysteries and strange phenomena to the questions that keep you up at night, we explore it all with curiosity and faith. I'm your host, Courtney, joined by my co-hosts Caleb and Jeremy. Together, we dive into the weird, the wonderful, and the wildly curious. So grab your coffee, open your mind, and let's babble. All right, everybody, welcome back to the Power of Babble. We are coming at you today with I don't want to say a fun episode.
It could be fun.
It's fun. It's always
just
fun.
kind of like, I don't know.
Who doesn't have fun when listening to the Power of Babble?
That's true.
Yeah.
That's true. What are we talking about today? What are we getting into?
We're talking about. Would you use the term SJWs?
No, I mean, well, okay, so we're not mainly going to talk about SJWs, right? Because those are the social justice warriors.
Yeah, Courtney had no idea
I'm
what
like,
the term
please
was.
enlighten me on what you're talking about.
Yeah, so
Social justice
Warrior.
warriors.
warriors, yeah.
These are people that fight hard for
Social
Yeah.
justice.
justices. Okay.
We are going to talk about social justice. We may talk about the warriors as well.
Yeah.
That's
Okay.
it. That's it. That's what we're talking about.
Social justice.
Spicy, very spicy.
I'm a little nervous about how spicy this one might get. I'm not gonna
Okay.
lie. We'll have to rein it in a little bit.
I'm ready
maybe.
to fight.
I think
Y'all two are gonna be the ones fighting.
I think I'm finally going to have a legitimately hot take, but
Yeah, Jeremy always does this in every episode. He goes,
He
"I have a hot take," and then he's
and then
like,
it turns out to
he's
be like
"Hear me out. H2O is
room-
water."
yeah, it turns out to be like room temperature. Like,
Yeah.
why did you even preface that? Like, this is just something. No, this one I might have a hot take, but we'll let you judge.
We'll see.
We'll
Yeah.
see. We'll see. Okay.
Well, no.
you-
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say maybe let's start by I pulled up a definition
Mm-hmm.
Ooh.
of social justice, and then I'm curious, like, kind of where your heads go. This is the AI overview from
Oh,
Google.
We- Okay, so this is
that's
the
what we
Google
all
AI.
need more of in our lives.
AI. I'm scared. We've got to do a part 2 AI because
You
I'm
know-
really getting nervous about AI right
Yeah.
now.
You could make a whole episode on social justice and AI, but let's
Ooh.
just hear what AI says about social
Yeah.
justice.
Okay. So here it says justice is the pursuit of a fair society where everyone has equal rights, opportunities, and access to resources, regardless of background.
Doesn't that sound nice?
Yeah,
Sounds wonderful.
Who could disagree with that?
yeah. I think if that were the functional definition. See, this is the problem with definitions sometimes is you can have a theoretical definition of something and then the functional definition, which is how you put that thing into practice. And if that theoretical definition were how things actually worked out in the world, I don't think that you would find anybody who disagreed with that.
I would be a social justice warrior
Yeah.
under that definition.
Jeremy would have blue hair.
Well, but see, this is where we get into what does it look like in practice. And I want to say before we get too far down the road, this whole conversation looming over it is the shadow of a worldview and an intellectual movement called postmodernism. Because what our conversation is going to revolve around today and how I think our audience will perceive our conversation, the kinds of assumptions they're bringing to this, has a lot to do with the meanings of words, right? And how far can you get from the meanings of words, right? The concept behind the word and the words themselves, and what kind of space is there?
Yeah.
How much can we stretch that definition? And at what point does justice cease to be justice, even if we call it justice, right?
Yeah.
So I know that sounds
Okay.
kind of cryptic, right? Like, ooh, what is this? But that's the kind of stuff that happens in postmodernism. Is you get a bunch of French philosophers who repeat a word until you're like, I don't even know what that means anymore, and that's the whole practice of postmodern philosophy.
Yeah.
The core of our conversation, I think, is going to be around what really is justice,
Mm.
and how far, if there is any distance, is that from social justice.
Yeah. Well, I feel like you can trace this back even to Genesis, where I feel like we all have this desire within us to, I mean, what stood out to me was equal rights. But I mean, I'm thinking about Cain and Abel,
Mm.
who he felt this like injustice had been done against him. And I mean, I feel like that's kind of what I read out of it and that's why he killed Abel.
Yeah.
Was he felt like an injustice had been done against him. God was holding out on him. And so there is something within us that craves that, I guess, and wants to see this ideal world that's not possible.
Well, this we might get more theological early on than I thought we would, because
Oh,
this is, I think what you're pointing to is really kind of fundamental, which is, I think maybe in the common speech, I mean, if you just break down the compound phrase social justice, right? The idea is that this idea of justice, whatever that is, because as Jeremy was alluding to, we might define that differently in terms of what we actually think justice means. But let's just take the definition you gave: some sort of fairness, equality, something like that. The idea that quality, equality, and fairness, and what is right would be instituted within the context of relationship,
mm-hmm.
right? That's the social aspect, right? And so within a community, because when we use a word like social or society, what we're really talking about is a plurality of persons in a community in some kind of cooperative relationship with one another.
Right.
Yeah.
And within that context, can you have fairness, equality? Can what is right be enacted within that community?
And who's to say that what I believe is right is what you
And there's the
and
problem.
you know, it's
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
it's not
'Cause-
level.
Yeah, because in so according to what Caleb is saying, if we adopt that definition of social justice, then social justice is really just justice on a societal level.
Right.
And in that definition, it looks kind of like the the millennial reign, the new heavens and new earth.
Yeah.
Society
New creation.
is good, right?
Mhm.
There's not anything fundamentally wrong with how we are relating to one another. There is fairness, there is equality. There is we're looking out for each other's mutual good. This is a worthwhile goal. So then we're back to the question, what's wrong with social justice?
Mhm.
And I'm kind of like, pointing us in that direction because I'm sure our audience is aware they might count themselves in this camp of people who are skeptical of social justice.
Yeah.
So who could possibly skeptical of social justice if it's justice on a societal level? Well, the problem is in its manifestation and practice, that's not always what it looks like.
Yeah. Well, and you don't want to land on the wrong side of what people view as social justice
Mhm.
because you can get canceled or
Mhm.
be called a bigot. I mean, there's a lot. It's hard to talk about stuff like this
Sure.
because, you know.
Yeah, I think that what it's going to boil down to is, so in the sort of, to use a philosophical term, the Platonic ideal of what justice is, in other words, just the theoretical version, um, you're not going to have a ton of disagreement on those things, which means that the problem is not necessarily in the justice part. The problem is in the social part.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is not even just the relations between the persons in the community, but the what makes up the community itself, namely the persons themselves, right? So the ideal example of what justice is enacted in the individual and then enacted from individual to another person, right? That's the exchange. Um, Something gets messed up in the works there, right? Like at some point in this process, justice is corrupted in some way. That's why some people are skeptical, is because what we see is the enactment of what is supposedly justice within a society being done in a way that for some reason we all can't agree on the way that it should be enacted, or the way in which it bears fruit in our company. And the reason why I think is going to take us back again to Genesis, which is because we are all corrupted by sin,
Right.
which means that in order for us, and that ideal, it's not a Platonic ideal, it's actually the character and nature of God, right? That's what we're referring to. When we're sort of stretching ourselves towards some ideal moral concept, what we're really doing is stretching ourselves towards God and His nature, to reclaim the characteristics of His nature. But because we're corrupt, every time we do that, it's not going to hit the mark. We're gonna have a tainted version of justice.
I would say that's a big part of it. But part of my hot take is one part of it is that I think that social justice, what we currently see being enacted under the banner of social justice, is often not justice at all.
Yeah.
And so that's the fallenness of man and sin is part of that explanation. But we also have to recognize that behind this is, in my opinion, a completely different worldview from Christianity. And I forget who it was. I think it was, and this was all the way back in the mid 20th century. It was either, I think, C.S. Lewis or T.S. Eliot made a brief throwaway comment about social justice, that term, in something I was reading. And it stuck out to me because I was surprised that it was something that was being thrown around that early. But they said basically the problem with social justice is that as soon as you add social to it, what it becomes in practice is not justice at all. That's basically my position. Because what you often find if you listen to the people who are very invested in social justice, especially outside of a Christian framework, but some people who, say that they're Christians as well, is that the conclusions that you're led to on how to behave justly and what you should do to make a more just society are very unjust. And there is a strong case to be made, I think, that what we call social justice is actually a worldview that is basically a new form of Marxism, right? And Marxism says, basically, there are two groups of people in the world. There are oppressors and there are the oppressed. And Marxism, classical Marxism, defined this economically, right? The people who have money, wealth, capital, the people who are exploited for their labor. And what Marxism said is that in order to put society right, we have to elevate the oppressed people in such a way that often includes killing and doing all sorts of other horrible things to the oppressors, and that this is the necessary cost of setting society right and the end of history and making a just world. Social justice, the current social justice movement, in my view, has taken that same dichotomy between oppressors and oppressed, but they apply it to certain things like sexuality or gender or class in general, and all of the above. But the moral move is the same, right? To where, in the name of what's supposed to be an ultimate justice, right? At the end of history, finally, we're going to achieve it one day. That there's all sorts of oppression and injustice that can happen in the meantime, because the end will justify it. And so when I hear the term social justice, personally, I don't think that's a term that the church should use as something that we are championing. I think that, that term for me represents a worldview that is hostile to Christianity, because Christianity doesn't just say that one day the world will be just, but it says that in the meantime, we also must be just and act justly. Irrespective, and we're not drawing a line, between people whom it's okay not to treat them justly, but these people you have to treat justly. That idea is fundamentally inimical to Christianity. And we have the confidence that a perfect world will be achieved, not through human effort and, all sorts of injustice along the way, but through God's actions and saving salvation history and saving work, independently of what we do.
Yeah.
And so for me, I personally think it would be best if the church completely rejected the term social justice. And, you can acknowledge that it's a real term that people use, but I think that anytime the church, is trying to appeal to the culture by talking about social justice, I think that's a little misguided because of the worldview thing I'm talking about. That's my rant. That's my hot take.
Yeah, I don't necessarily disagree with
Yeah.
what you're saying. I don't think it's a very hot take. One thing, I don't know how hot we want to get on here, but
Another warm take from Jeremy.
one thing that really kind of sparked something in my mind when you were talking about that, or I guess maybe an example of what I think you're saying, is I was all the stuff that went down with Charlie Kirk. And my husband had ran in to pick up something, and I was in the car, my windows were down, and I hear two college age kids walking to their car talking about how everyone is better off because
Yeah.
Charlie Kirk was assassinated, and they went on to say some other things, but I'm just in my mind, I'm just thinking
Yeah.
exactly what you're saying. Why did he have to? That was an injustice that was done to him, but yet what you stand for is this justice that you want, just
Yeah.
because he was saying things that were, again, just that tension of like what he thought was right and what you
Right.
think is right is different, but he had to die for that.
Yeah.
And that's okay for you. But, and so I think this is a lot of what we see around all of these topics. Around justice in our world is just two polar opposite opinions on what that looks like, and how do we even learn to live with that. And so I understand what you're saying, as far as like the term, but I do think that the church has a role to play in this. It's
Sure.
just, what is that role?
Right.
I think that what Jeremy's really describing, what he did a good job of describing, is what sometimes people will refer to as cultural Marxism, right? I mean, it's exactly what you said. It's this idea that this system of thinking, of classifying categories of people that used to belong to an economic system, and really sort of applying that on really across the board, socially speaking. But and it is the example of the story that you just told is a perfect example of what Jeremy was referring to, wherein the ends justify the means.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. Which is to say, and here's what the underlying assumption beneath the claim that the ends necessarily justify the means, right? In other words, how we got there is less important than the fact that we get to the destination that we're wanting, namely this person whom we disagree with. If their ideas or what they're doing that we disagree with is stopped, then whatever means necessary is appropriate. Well, what that does is that assumes a concept of ethics that's called consequentialism.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
So consequentialism is a pragmatic view of what grounds morality, and the claim is basically whatever winds up the best is what is good. So it defines the good as anything that gets us to our desired result. And there are a number of problems with this as an ethical system. The first question that I want to ask is what. Okay, if the claim is that whatever gets us to to the end, the good result, therefore is also good, I want to ask the question: what makes the end result good? Right?
Yeah.
If baked into the definition of what is good is that it leads to a certain consequence, well, then you have to tell me why the consequence itself is good. And what this shows, I think, is that the fact that you can't answer that question, right, on this worldview, what it shows is that actually what we're dealing with is ungrounded morality.
Yeah.
But let me kind of push back on that for the sake of airing the other side. Is like what do you mean it's ungrounded? Everyone agrees that justice is good.
Yeah.
Right.
So the universality. Right. When we talk about something, a universal thought or a universal belief, you're talking about epistemology, right? Let me define that for
Lots of big words here.
I'll define that for our listeners and
Start climbing out of the weeds again.
And viewers. So epistemology is about things that we know.
Okay.
It's about our knowledge of something, right? I'm going to give you another big word. You can file this one away. A different but related, but a different category, not epistemology, not what we know about things, but ontology
Okay.
is about the things that are, whether we know them or not.
Okay.
Right.
Okay. Now we can talk about how our epistemology, how our knowledge, how we gain knowledge of what is, right? What is ontologically real, right? But they are not the same thing. And so I could say that there is universal epistemic agreement within a particular set of people. In other words, everyone agrees that they think the same thing about a particular thing, and that doesn't tell us anything about whether that thing is true.
Right.
Yeah, because then you get something like Nazi Germany.
Well,
that's exactly right.
Truly.
That's exactly right.
Where's the line?
So what Caleb's saying basically is that like everyone can agree that justice is good and everybody should want justice. But that doesn't really explain if justice is real or where it comes from or why.
Yeah.
we should all strive for it. The thing, and I will note as well, for our listeners, that what Caleb's describing, this split between ontology and epistemology, postmodernism rejects that,
Mm.
because for postmodernism, ontology is completely inaccessible. We can't. It's useless to engage in debates about ontology because we will never know it, because everything is just a bunch of language games. So, and that is how, again, this is a different worldview. That's how the cultural Marxist or neo-Marxist or SJW, whatever you want to call them, that crowd approaches this conversation, is that, well, your objection about ontology doesn't even make any sense because there is no ontology.
Right.
And so I will just highlight that. Obviously, that's not a good rebuttal to what
It's
Caleb's saying,
incoherent.
because it's incoherent. Because to say that there is no such thing as ontology is making
Is to make
Then
an
where do we
ontological
get-
claim.
Yeah.
but that is the perspective, and that's the kind of the underlying philosophical beliefs that allow this approach to ethics and justice.
I want to piggyback too on the point that you made, which is a really excellent point, which is about the universality of a belief. Nazi Germany is a good example of this, which is that we can create a localized society or a localized group of people who all agree that something is true, and yet I believe we do have epistemic access to be able to say that that's incorrect, right? I'll give you an example of something that may be a little bit more clear than maybe the because maybe we've got a Nazi watching us right now. Maybe they don't like that
welcome
example. I don't know. But there was a time in history
Mhm.
when the universal thought and belief was that the Earth was flat.
Yeah.
Now we might have some flat
Well,
earthers watching us.
I
still,
know we have
honestly.
some flat earthers watching, actually.
But
Listen up.
Welcome.
for the sake of what I'm saying is this is a body of knowledge,
Yeah.
right? That everyone believes, everyone agrees on, that is later through some other epistemic information that's provided,
Mhm.
it's overturned. And what we find is that just because it was universal at one time doesn't guarantee the objective reality of it.
Mm.
And this is really what we're talking about, is subjectivity versus objectivity, right? And so I can state an opinion. Something subjective would be like, tacos are better than hamburgers, right?
Factual.
That might actually be objective.
Yeah.
But that is relative from
Yeah.
person to person,
Right.
Right.
right? But if I say 2 + 2 = 4, well, this is an objective fact. This is something that is true independent of my knowledge of it. Maybe I don't know it. Maybe I don't. I would even agree with maybe the Marxists and say, even if I don't have access to it, it doesn't change whether or not this thing is real. And the fact that we're making moral judgments shows that we all do believe in some sense that we have an ability to ascertain the truth.
Right. It's just
Yeah.
hardwired into us. We have to make these kinds of judgments.
You can't live
as if-
life without it doing it.
As if, and that's a favorite phrase of a lot of pragmatic philosophers, but
Mhm.
as if they were true. And Caleb, what you're saying, if I hear you correctly, is that this as if is kind of hardwired into us. We have to assume an objectivity, whether or not we can prove it or whether or not we're mistaken about what exactly is objectively true.
Yeah, and the last thing I'll say on that subject is, because if we don't at least play the game, which I'm making the argument that it's not a game, right? That this is a feature of reality, and the fact that we should operate as if we have access to the truth about moral values and duties, is because if we don't, we will collapse into a form of radical skepticism that is unlivable.
Right.
Like, there's some famous philosophical claims about this, right? I mean, Rene Descartes, that we've talked about him on the podcast before, I think, the famous, I think, therefore I am, right? The reason why he says this is because he's exploring this idea of, like, how do I know anything? Right? How do I live my life? There are some things that, whether or not you can provide me with the evidential proof of it, there are some things that are just bedrock that I just know. And so a claim, a radical, let's move this into the moral, right? So
Yep.
a radical moral claim, okay? If I say torturing babies for fun is wrong, right? Show me the person who disagrees with that claim. It's wrong. Not in a consequentialist way. It just is wrong. Okay? Um if you find people who disagree with this claim, these are the people that we lock in mental institutions because we say that they're broken. Right? Why do we do that? Well, it's because there is a bedrock where what we're saying is there are some things that really are right and some things that really are wrong,
Right.
and we don't get to define what those things are, and define them based on an illusory consequence
Right.
that is also itself ungrounded, I guess, is the argument that I'm trying to make.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so I feel like we're heading in this direction. So maybe we're Christians. This is a Christian
Yeah.
podcast. If you're new here, this is what we're about. So as Christians, where in Scripture do we get this basis of justice? Like, where do you know what I'm asking?
Yes.
I'm
Okay.
glad you asked.
Yeah.
So many places. In the Old Testament, in the New Testament, many of the teachings of Jesus are about justice. Many of the teachings in the Mosaic Law are about justice. Here's just one passage that I think is interesting and hits exactly on this, and also I think illustrates in context a difference between justice and social justice as it currently operates now. This is from Exodus 23. Exodus 23. Starting in verse 2, this is the NLT. Starting in verse 2, going through verse 6. You must not follow the crowd in doing wrong. When you are called to testify in a dispute, do not be swayed by the crowd to twist justice. And do not slant your testimony in favor of a person just because that person is poor. Now, that's an interesting phrasing there, just because that person is poor. The author of this verse recognizes that in human affairs, there are people and times when we might be tempted to take the side of people who are disadvantaged just because, they in this case they have less money or less resources. And doing so might twist justice. Okay, let's keep going. If you come upon your enemy's ox or donkey that has strayed away, take it back to its owner. If you see that the donkey of someone who hates you has collapsed under its load, do not walk by. Instead, stop and help. And then the next verse. In a lawsuit, you must not deny justice to the poor. In there are multiple things that get to justice from multiple different sides, right? We have number one, don't take the poor person's side just because they're poor and twist justice that way. At the end, we have do not deny justice to the poor, right? So basically, you don't advantage the poor over other people, but you also make sure that they get the same justice that other people get. But in the middle of that, and this is an interesting thing, in the middle of those two verses is an admonition that if you see your enemy's donkey, in other words, their property, like wandering, lost, whatever, you take it back to them and help them. So number one, this is the command to love your enemy. But number two, in context here, I think this is kind of interesting because I think what's happening here is the author is recognizing that we're often tempted to apply justice based on the group that people are in and the group that we are in. And we do the math, okay, well, that person is like me because they're in this group with me. So maybe I'll be nicer to them. Well, this person's my enemy because of whatever reason. So maybe I'm not going to help them. And the biblical mandate is clear. Justice applies equally to everyone, including your enemies. And therefore, even if someone is your enemy, if you have the opportunity to do the right thing for them, in this case, hand them back their valuable property, you do it. And this is the biblical mandate of justice, the standard of justice that you find throughout the Bible.
Yeah.
So this immediately raises some questions for me, because I agree with Jeremy that the things that he's just pulled out of that text are the hallmarks of what biblical justice are. And what it suggests is an objectivity that we were talking about earlier, an to use that phrase again, ontologically objective, thought independent justice. And the reason why is because it can't be consequentialist, because you wouldn't do good to your enemy because it doesn't benefit you.
Yeah.
In fact, it might hurt you.
It might hurt you, right? And so you wouldn't do that if the idea was that I want to get to the end result that is preferable to me, right? And so it means that whatever justice is in that particular case must be something outside of the consequence for me or the other person, right? And this objectivity, the equality that is suggested here, implies that there has to be something objective that grounds it. And I think what we're saying, what we want to say as Christians, that the objective ground of morality is the character and nature of God.
Mm-hmm.
Right? There's a very famous dilemma, right, that's posed in philosophy sometimes, right? It's called the Euthyphro dilemma.
Mm-hmm.
Say that again.
The Euthyphro dilemma.
Euthyphro.
Right?
If you want to
Right.
look that up, it's EUTHYPHRO, right?
Yes, good job. So the Euthyphro dilemma is something that was thrown around in philosophy, and basically the question is this: is something good merely because God commands it, right? Or does God command something because it is good?
Okay.
Okay, I'll restate that just so that people know,
Yeah.
right? So it is something good just because God commands it, or does God command it because it is good? Now, the reason why this is called a dilemma is because it creates a problem for us if you're a believer in
It
God.
sounds like it's the same thing. It's not.
It's
yeah,
not.
I'm trying to work through
Yeah,
that.
so
for a second.
here's the
Okay.
problem. The problem is, let's take the first horn of the dilemma. Let's say that something is good just because God says it is. Okay? It's good in virtue of the fact that God commands it. Then the problem you have there is that the good in that case is arbitrary because God can just make it up.
It's kind of like God has a box or like a bowl of Skittles. It's just a bowl of Skittles.
That's right.
And then he goes through, and each Skittle represents an action. And then he goes through the bowl of Skittles, and he's like, "This one's good.
This one's
This
bad.
one's bad."
Yeah.
And just randomly, right?
So-
Not even based on, oh, this is a yellow Skittle, red Skittle. No, he's just good, bad, good, bad.
So
Okay.
the problem is arbitrariness, right? It's just arbitrary what's good and bad because God could just change his mind and just decide that one thing is good just because. If the thing that makes it good is that he commands it, then he could command something that we might think of as bad, right? It means that there really is no real ground. It's just arbitrary. He makes it up, right? That's the first horn of the dilemma.
And the implication is not only is it arbitrary what's good or bad, but that any kind of punishment for doing bad would also be arbitrary,
right? And so then you might end up with the thing is like, why do we need God in the first place? If he makes it up, why don't we just make it up, right? Like the point is, it's not grounded in anything. It's arbitrary. That's the first horn. Right, so we don't want to say that something is good just because God commands it, because that creates problems. What about the other option? The other option is, well, does God command it because it is good? Then you have another problem, and that problem is, well, if it's good and that's why he's commanding it, then there's something good outside of God that grounds the commandment. So we don't need God to command it at all, right? Because he's only commanding it because it's good. So it's already good, right? And so they're saying, look, the issue here is that you don't actually need God in that case. So can you see the problems?
I'm trying to wrap my head around that. I guess when you talk about God saying something is good, I'm reminded of creation. So I don't know.
Right.
I'm just getting stuck on that right
so
now.
let me help you with the creation thing then. Okay.
Yeah.
So when God creates and then he says he saw that it was good, right? He said this is good. Okay. Did he say that it's good because there's something out there beyond him called goodness? And when he saw the creation, he said this matches that's out there called the good.
Okay, I
That's the
understand.
problem of the second
him.
horn. Right.
It matches him.
Okay, you're getting somewhere here because so this is the thing that we say we have a dilemma. We have either goodness is arbitrary because it's just based on whatever God decides to command, or we don't need God because goodness is objective, independent of God.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay. Okay. I'm
I
here with
want
you
to I
now.
want to point out as well. This is a dilemma about authority.
Mm,
In the first case, goodness is entirely based on authority, not morality.
right.
In the second place, morality exists independently of God's authority.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
And so this is the supposed dilemma. And I say supposed because it's a false dilemma.
Well, it was. I mean, in fairness, though, in the context of Euthyphro, it wasn't really a false dilemma because it was a pagan context, right? And the pagan presuppositions about God and his nature are very different. And through the years, as I'm sure you're about to let us know, there's a way around this, and it involves the Christian God, the God of the Bible.
That's right. But I will say though, I mean, in fairness to the pagans, they actually, if you go read the Euthyphro dialogue, like they get pretty close to answering the question. They answer it with paganism, so it's
Mhm.
not quite the right answer, but pretty close. And this is the answer. We don't have to pick either horn of the dilemma because there's a third option. God does not. Things are not good just because God commands them, and God does not command things just because they are good. Rather, God commands things because He is good.
Okay.
So you're better than a lot of philosophers because you immediately picked up on this, Court.
Wow.
You'd be
Say
surprised.
less. That's why I'm on this podcast. I'm smart.
Every now and then, let me say this: I have seen in the past things that were written in the past few years, citing Euthyphro as a reason why Christianity can't be true. And every time
Yeah.
what? Like
This has been answered for
this-
centuries,
This
but
has been solved. Yeah.
but there are still philosophers who will use this as an objection. So the claim, to be crystal clear, the claim is not that God, it's not arbitrary because God commands things that flow out naturally from His nature.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay.
His commandments are in sync with who He is.
Mhm.
Right? So that's why He commands them. And it's not something independent from Him because His nature is essential. Right? It's necessary that His nature is what it is. He couldn't be any other way because He is an eternal, necessarily existing being.
Right.
And so when He commands something, it is good because He is good.
Mhm.
So, in other words, when we talk about justice, to get us back to our conversation,
Yeah.
right? When we talk about justice, that which is just, what we're really referring to is that which reflects the nature and goodness of God.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And if it reflects the nature and goodness of God, then it is just. So to the text that Jeremy read, I mean, what we have is this objective, independent frame of what is good that is true, independent of consequence. That's why he can say things like, do good to those who hate you.
Yep.
Right? Because even though the consequence might be negative for me, it's still good, independent of the circumstance.
He causes the rain to fall on the just and the unjust.
That's right.
Yeah.
Because that's His nature. While you were yet sinners, Christ died for you.
Yeah.
Well, and remind me what the term is, consequentialism?
Yes.
Is that what you said? Okay.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I feel like within social justice that, and maybe this is like kind of where Jeremy was going, within our society right now, I feel like that's what it's based a lot off of, is this idea of, really, I want justice. It's a selfish reason.
Mhm.
I want this. I mean, I'm thinking of a lot of different things,
Yeah.
and I don't know how hot topic we're going to get, but like just the idea of like abortion.
Mhm.
I'm going to do something injustice to something so that, because really it's ultimately it's about me.
Personal autonomy reigns
Yes.
supreme. Yeah.
So I don't know quite where I was going with
Well,
that,
I-
Yeah, I mean, it's well, this goes back to human fallenness, right? Because every ethical movement, and position, there are potentially cynical reasons for taking that position. So, like self-interested reasons. I don't want to dismiss the people who believe strongly in social justice. I don't want to dismiss all of that as cynical or selfish.
right.
Because there are, and some of them, are in it for the signaling, the posturing, the because it has been fashionable for some time, the social clout it gives them. But that has also been true of Christianity and people who claim to advance Christian
That's true,
values.
yeah.
yeah.
What
Yeah.
I see it as is more of the divide is really also fundamentally about like the nature of justice, right? Is justice something that we will get to eventually and anything is excusable in the meantime, consequentialism, or is justice something that we need to incarnate now, even as we look forward to an ultimate justice.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that part of I agree with both of the things that both of you have said here because um, I think that what really is underlying a lot of this is this sort of elevation of personal autonomy. But people will not claim people who believe this. People who advocate for social justice in this way are not always advocating it in a transparently selfish way. Um, but they might frame it like this. If we're trying to be um, we're trying not to create a straw man that we want to attack here. So if I were a person who were a non-believer and I were trying to ground ethics and justice, right? I might say something like humanism is true, right? So humanism might be the view that the way I'm going to define it here for the sake of simplicity is whatever is best for human flourishing. Right. And so maybe I'll say that this is not a selfish thing because I want all humans to flourish. Right.
Mhm.
That's not selfish. This is for the betterment of humanity. Right.
Yeah.
Humanity is going to flourish under these sets of circumstances. So these are the ends that we're trying to get to. We want to get to this end result. And so what I would want to say to that in response to that from a biblical point of view is to say, well, look, this is actually an altruistic approach, so like good for you for trying to think in terms of what will benefit humanity, but there are some assumptions baked into this. The most obvious assumption is, why is it good that humans flourish? Right. And so you've got really a couple of problems. If we can't answer the question for why it is good that humans flourish, then what is to compel me as a member of this society to act in accordance with other people's human flourishing? I mean, if God is not, if we don't have an objective grounding for what is just and what is unjust, then the default for me as an individual will be something like Darwinism, right?
Yes.
Um,
That's correct, and that's where a lot, especially on the secular naturalist end, which there's some overlap
yeah.
with postmodernism there.
Yeah, and
That's where they take it.
the other problem is going to be this, which is that my idea of human flourishing and your idea of human flourishing may conflict.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's what I was kind of trying to get at was,
Yeah.
it seems as though with consequentialism, there is this lack of what is objectively good.
Yes.
And so the default to that is, oh, well, it's whatever's good for me.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so
I will say the way that it often gets phrased, and the socially in vogue way to express that is not what's good for me, it's what's authentic for me.
Yeah.
What feels fulfilling
Right.
for me.
Yeah.
Right. Because then it's not so much like, because if you say like what's good for me is like, oh, like I'm gonna get more money or stuff or whatever. But if you phrase it as fulfillment, right? And it's like, well, I mean, it seems like a perfectly good thing to
yeah,
be
who
for
doesn't
everyone
want
to
to
be
feel fulfilled?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
That's-
this is where like the language about like follow your heart, live your dreams,
truth.
live your truth, all
Right.
of that is wrapped up in that
This
same
is
idea.
why I use the phrase personal autonomy, because
Yeah.
it seems like there is this it is often, I think, cloaked in this idea of defining who you are, right? Which is a whole other podcast of whether or not you can define who you are.
Yeah.
Defining your own identity and then living in accordance with it. And if any other person's actions or beliefs conflict with the, in some cases, I would argue, arbitrary definitions of what and who we think we are, and what and who what we think that we should be able to do and not do. If that conflicts, then this is where we get identity politics, right? Which is if I've wrapped up my own personal identity within the way in which ethical or political beliefs operate, then when a person disagrees with me, they're not disagreeing with me about some issue. They're actually disagreeing with who I am, right?
Yeah.
And so I understand the impulse, which is to say, like, this is what this really is, if you drill down, is ultimate selfishness. I know that sounds harsh.
Yes.
But it really is, even if it's sort of presented within the cloak of altruism.
Yeah.
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 Well, and I want to bring us back to what we were talking about as far as justice in scripture, that just reminds me of fast forward to the New Testament and the Sermon on the Mount,
Mm,
where when you read it, it's very countercultural for this idea of selfishness,
yeah.
because it is truly about true justice is lowering yourself below other people,
Yeah.
Right.
right? Turn the other cheek. Like what?
Right.
Like how do you do that?
Yeah.
But that's very hard in this society um to not act selfishly, especially like one of y'all were saying, especially for those who have done you wrong, because justice for me would be to right that wrong
Yeah.
and to get them back, but that's really not justice
Yeah.
in a sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
I don't know.
and I think a lot of the perversions of actual justice that we see in the name of an ultimate justice for the cultural Marxism on that behalf is really because I think of a deep anxiety, an existential anxiety. I think, right? What do I mean by that? Basically, if you don't have God, an omnipotent, divine, good being who is ensuring that justice will happen, then we have to ensure justice happens.
It's a heavy
Yeah,
weight.
yeah. I mean, that's one way to.
Yeah, it's a very heavy way, and this what it sort of, I think, gets us to is the question of what Jeremy just said is sort of the question of how okay, if we have this problem of we have a difficulty in creating and defining justice on our own, right? Because it's untethered and ungrounded.
Mhm.
If we do that, I think that's what we've been trying to argue here, that it's untethered and ungrounded. Okay, and then we say that what it really needs is to be grounded in and rooted in something objective. And what we're arguing is that the best thing for that is God. Um, then it raises a further question, right? Which is, I think, that one of the questions that the Sermon on the Mount is trying to sort of enact, by confronting us with these hard ethics, is to say, okay, let's say that justice is grounded in the objectivity of God. Let's say that it is eternal. It is this external source from us, so the responsibility is not on us to define it, and yet it does carry responsibility.
Yeah.
And the responsibility is that you have to live it out.
Right.
So maybe this is maybe I'm doing your job and asking a question here, which is like
job.
is what way, who is responsible, what institutions are responsible for, and how does the living out of justice that's grounded in God, how does that work in the world?
Mm,
You
Well,
know,
that is the question.
that is the
Let me-
question.
So there's kind of a thought experiment that's been living rent free in my head for a few years now, and I think how you answer this, especially given a lot of the hot button things in our culture right now, goes a long way to expressing your own theory of justice. But it's basically this: if you found someone who you knew to be an illegal immigrant, unconscious, in front of your door, what would you do?
Mm,
Or something along those lines,
Hmm.
right?
mm,
Because to Kayla's point, there's a macro sense of what should our laws be? What can the government do to ensure right and wrong? That in general, good morality
Mhm.
is encouraged. People aren't killing one another. But at the end of the day, we are responsible for our choices in our lives. And so, what do we do in a specific situation in which there are potentially competing claims to justice, right?
yeah.
What do we do when we encounter someone's, ox or cattle, our enemies wandering on the side of the road? In modern sense, it's like, what do we do if we find, the wallet of someone who, someone who hates us or whatever, right?
Yeah.
Right.
What do you do? Or what do you do if you find someone whom society is encouraging you to think of as your enemy, or encouraging you to think of as someone that you might have something against in whatever sense, and they need help?
Yeah. I think that there are there are a couple ways to look at it, because there's a couple of impulses that you might have to answer these questions. Um, the one that I think that you see in society, the way in which people will answer the question, how is justice enacted in the world? They will want to point toward government, right? Government as the means.
What a great thing to point to.
Yeah, and it's always such a great solution. Um, to say that in some way, but politics, law, government, things like that, and there's reason for this, right? I mean, there is reason for this. I mean, let's
Yeah.
think about it from a biblical point of view. In the Old Testament, you have a government that has specific laws that are aimed at justice,
Mhm.
right? Now there's a good book. I like the book. I don't know if Courtney likes it, but I like this book
I
called
liked it.
it's by Tim Keller, called Generous Justice.
Yes.
And he argues in the book that, look, there are actually a couple of different terms, senses in which we use that word justice. One is mishpat, and the other one is tzedek or tzedekah, something like that. The former, mishpat, means basically it means fairness under the law, right? And fairness under the law would mean that, like, we have laws that make sure that that whatever is that judgment is doled out in a way that is equitable,
Mhm.
right, for each person. Okay, that you get what's coming to you, basically, according to the law. And then this other term, tzedek, is actually, it's often translated as righteousness, and it is a covenantal term. It's about our relationship to God,
Mhm.
our standing before Him, right? How we relate to God in terms of His goodness and His justice, and that is not always the same thing as mishpat,
Mhm.
right? What is fair, or what's coming to you, does not always match the tzedek or the righteousness of God.
Right.
What am I thinking of here? Well, I'm thinking of, well, we were enemies of God,
Right.
right? Deserve what's coming to us as an enemy of God. Well, the wrath of God, the judgment of God, that's what's coming to us under the fairness of the law, right? But God, in His righteousness, has not given us what we deserve, and instead has provided the means of our atonement, of our ransom, through His Son Jesus. And so this is a beautiful picture, and He hasn't done this at the expense of justice being poured out, by the way. Right? It's not as though He ignores the justice that is deserved to be poured out and favors the other word, or the other definition of what justice is. Instead, He marries the two by pouring out His wrath upon Himself in the cross, right? And so, and Keller points this out in his book, which is that oftentimes, even in the Old Testament, these two terms are married together.
Mhm.
They're used back to back because we need both.
Yeah.
And I'll go ahead and put my cards on the table and see what you guys think of this. I think that in the New Covenant, right, in New Testament times, when we ask the question, where do we find this kind of justice? Where do we find the kind of justice that gives equal footing to both fairness under the law and this kind of righteousness before God, this covenantal relationship?
Mhm.
Because the Old Testament was a theocracy, right? The Old Testament, God was the king of the government. We don't live in that world.
Yeah. In theory, at least.
In theory.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that was the idea. But in this new covenant time, we don't live in a theocracy like that. We live in pagan governments in most cases. And so what I would argue is that while God, and this is part of what Paul talks about in his epistles about how God has ordained the governing authorities to carry out justice, they're ministers of justice insofar as making sure that penalties are doled out the way that they should be, that fairness is done under the law, that kind of thing.
The best we can hope for from a secular government is mishpat.
Mishpat, that's right. Fairness under the law.
That the laws that are stated, those are effectively and fairly carried out.
Yeah.
But we can't assume that those governments or those sources of mishpat will provide for us the Zedek
Yeah.
righteousness.
Yeah.
And the source in which you should find that is the church.
Yeah.
I would agree with that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the church.
Well, and that's kind of leading to where I kind of want to, I guess, land this plane
Mm-hmm.
is, um, the government is not ever going to be perfect in that. And so how do we as both. How do we, as the local church that you're a part of in your community, and then the capital C church, and I just really just mean you as a person of the church.
Yeah.
How do we like combat this, and what ultimately is? I feel like there's a lot of emphasis when I have conversations with people. I've just had one recently with a coworker. Um, just like, okay, so in regards to like homeless people, and she was saying, the church should really be doing more for the homeless. Or she mentioned like the churches sit empty throughout the week, like why aren't they like housing homeless people in them and doing all of that? And so I guess my question is, what is the burden of the local institutional church for social justice? And then at what point is it up to us as the church to go out rather than coming in? Am I making sense at all in
Yes.
that?
Yeah.
Because that's something personally that I have struggled with too. Because I found myself
Mhm.
sometimes, sorry, church, but being like, oh man, like we should be doing more as a local body. Um, and then I just kind of had this realization, like, but that's me. Like, I can do that. Like, I can go out and be the solution. I'm not the solution, God is the solution, but like I can be the hands and feet of Christ and go out and do my part and not leave it up to this institution.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I just feel like there's from within the church, but then also like from outside unbelievers looking at us, like how do we, I don't know.
Yeah. You're posing a question that could be a podcast on its own, which
Yeah.
I think is what sort of undergirds
Yeah.
your question is what is the church?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And it's complicated, so I'll just give some thought provoking response to it, rather than actual like full blown thesis on it. Which is that I think that your impulse is correct, and I don't want to necessarily create too much of a bifurcation, like
What does that mean?
to separate the two things.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because I want to say, to answer your question, I want to say yes.
Yeah.
Right. Which is
I agree.
to say that I guess if you ask the question, is the church an institution? Then I would say, yeah, the church is an institution in some respects, right?
Mhm.
It's an organization, right? It's a community of people who often pull together resources to accomplish certain tasks.
Right.
And there's structural government to it, right? I mean, it has all the hallmarks of an institution.
Right.
It's the only institution that Jesus left behind on the earth, by the way. He didn't give us a political charter for here's how you should vote in the next election. Instead,
Despite what some people might say.
Yeah.
exactly. Instead, what he did is he said, no, this is going to be the body. Right. I mean, we use those terms in government, right? As some sort of judicial body, right? This is going to be the communal institution through which the kingdom of God is going to be enacted upon the earth, right? So it is an institution. And so to answer the question about, well, how is justice poured out within the community of not just of believers, but because we are the light of the world, how do we dispense justice through the institution of the church? I think that's a question we should ask.
Yeah.
How can we better use our resources institutionally to respond to these things, to live up to what the Sermon on the Mount is trying to get out of us, which is to say you need to think differently. Really, what the Sermon on the Mount is about, it's about sort of reconfiguring our mind and how we think about God's law.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I feel like a lot of people, when they read the Sermon on the Mount, I did the Bible Project has a phenomenal, I did a
Yes.
year-long study of the Sermon on the Mount.
Yeah.
It was fabulous. But I feel like, and I did this too, when you read it and you read things like when someone, hits you, turn the other cheek. And it's
Right.
like, what a coward thing to do, from the outside looking in.
Right.
Or, they take your shirt off from your coat. But it's really not, it's really about showing when you honestly like kill them with kindness, like
Yes.
show them
Yeah.
like there is a better way to live than
Yes.
what you're doing. It's
Yeah.
not a coward thing. It's actually you're truly showing them the love.
The way things ought to be.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, and so this is really, I think that is what the Sermon on the Mount. It's about reconfiguring our mind. So we should think in those terms about how the institution of the church can enact that in a way that is more biblically based.
Yeah.
But I see the other branch of what you're getting at too, Court, which is that institutions do not exist in a vacuum, right? They don't exist independently of individuals at all. I mean, think about it. If I say the mall or the police station, right, or maybe the court, that's an institution, right? The court, and yet there's no one inside the building,
Right.
then what am I really referring
is
to?
it?
I'm not referring to anything. What we're talking about is we're talking about the thing that arises when individuals do something together.
Right.
In which case, it's very easy for us, I think, to externalize the church, even though we belong to it, right?
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah,
By saying, yeah, the church should do a better job of that,
yeah, yeah.
right? The
Yeah.
institution, and we're thinking of it in external terms,
Mhm.
whereas we're the one wearing the judge's robe in a sense,
Yeah.
and it's like, well, actually, I am the body of Christ.
Yeah.
Yes.
I am and to use Paul's terminology, right? You know, the body is made up of all these parts, and all the parts have to be jointly fit together, or the body can't do what it's supposed to do. And so you should ask the institutional question,
Yeah.
and then one of the ways in which you should answer the question is by doing your role
Yeah,
as a
looking in
member
the
of the
mirror.
body, right?
And
Exactly.
Yeah.
I will say what makes this more difficult is that one of the things that makes it more difficult is that it is true that we can accomplish more, exponentially more together through an institution than we can individually.
Yeah.
And so, just pushing it back on the individual isn't really an answer here. And I'm not saying either of you are doing that.
Right.
But at the same time, one of the reasons why justice is so difficult is because we have limited knowledge. Our things that we do to encourage justice are of limited effectiveness. We can be completely misguided in what we're doing. And it is oftentimes, especially, Courtney, you mentioned the homeless as one of the things that people are saying the church should do more for. That, like, the problem of homelessness is for me one of these things to where I'm constantly asking myself, is my opinion on this, is it, am I saying that, things that people are doing that I believe are misguided? Am I using that as an excuse to just not do anything? Or is it in fact that, we need to be, the mishpat is being like the fairness under the law, under regulations, actions have consequences, is that part of it's being neglected by and large, and that what needs to be encouraged is that. And in this disjunction, which Keller's distinction between mishpat and zedek, I think is key here, because on the one hand, actions need to have consequences, the law needs to be followed, and it needs to be followed fairly for everyone involved. But on the other hand, the New Testament is very clear in that if all you ever do is insist on fairness and actions having consequences, that is fine, but you will also be judged according to that standard, right?
Yeah.
This is the parable of the ungrateful servant who was
Yeah.
forgiven tons and
Yeah.
then tried to hold one of his peers to a harsher standard. And for me, just putting my own cards on the table with the example that I gave, right? There's an illegal immigrant who immediately needs your help. I think that the biblical thing to do is help them, irrespective of any kinds of questions
Right.
of legal justice or anything like that.
Right.
The Bible is clear that you owe mercy and, well, not owe, but because God has given mercy and help to us,
Yeah.
regardless of whether we're just or unjust, that we're encouraged to give the same thing to anyone that we find ourselves around who needs it, whether we think they deserve it, whether we think they're our enemy, regardless of any of that,
Yeah.
especially in the case of, pressing bodily needs or pressing material
Mhm.
needs and things like that.
Yeah, that is the gospel being lived out. And I'll just kind of share my 2 cents on, institution versus just the church body. And I feel like our church does a really good job at this because I think that the institutional church exists to come together and lift up the name of God and send people out to do the work of Christ. Like that's my view of what a good and solid church does. And I feel like our church does a good job of that. Um, Not to say that we shouldn't do things um, in house,
Right.
but ultimately we are to be sent out. I mean, that is the
Yeah,
Great Commission.
it is.
And so I feel like there's a lot of people that sit in churches and they don't do because they expect the church to do.
Mm.
And shameless plug, I guess.
Mm.
Um, but like thinking about the Rhea House, if you're
Mhm.
not familiar, it's a nonprofit that I have started to help foster kids. But what I found in doing that is when you just take a step towards doing something for people that need justice, what you'll find is that other people will come alongside you, and it's not going to be like you said. It's not just going to be on me, but it is what I have done is now that I have created a space where other people can come alongside and help that
Yeah.
initiative. So,
Mhm.
um, I don't know, maybe that's for somebody that is kind of thinking that has a passion for, doing something for people in need.
Yeah.
Just take a step and do it because what you'll find, especially as a believer, what you'll find is people are going to come alongside you. The institutional church is going to come around you and like
Yeah.
fuel your mission. And we
That's right.
saw that too, like in scripture.
Mm.
People, just
Yeah.
fuel your mission. So I don't really know how quite to wrap this up. Anybody have
Well,
any other
I,
No.
thoughts?
I have some just maybe some closing thoughts about because everything you said is awesome. TheRayHouse.org, by the way. That
Yes.
is the website, right?
TheRayHouse.org, yes.
Yeah. Um, so this whole idea of the church being sort of the mechanism, I'll use that word, through which God delivers his kingdom to the world.
Mm.
So to answer a question that maybe in some of our viewers and listeners' mind is, if we can't actually fix the problem of injustice
It's
that's in the world,
overwhelming. We can't.
it's an
Yeah.
insurmountable
Mm-hmm.
problem, right? I mean, I even think about the words of Jesus, right, who says, "The poor you will have with you always,"
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
As if to say, look, if you're worried about this problem, it's not going away,
Yeah.
right? This problem is here. And so when we look around and we see all this injustice, and then we talk about how justice is grounded in the nature and the goodness of God, and we are, as the body of Christ, whether we are talking about the institution or is about individuals who make up that institution, we're the means by which that justice is poured out in the world. Why should we waste our time doing it if we can't fix the problem?
Mhm.
Mm.
And I think the answer is that what the church is not. The church is not the new creation in its fullness.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. We're a taste of that.
The
Yeah.
church is a glimpse of the new
Yeah.
creation.
Yeah.
And so this is why secular, I'll use that term even though I don't really like the term, um, you know, solutions to the problem of justice are unsatisfying.
Mhm.
When we try to scratch the itch of justice, through some means that is not a part of God's redemptive plan, what we will find is frustration and frustration only because you
Mm.
can't do it. It won't be done.
Yeah.
But when we do it in the context of God's redemptive purpose, what we realize is that what we're actually doing is that we are giving a glimpse. We are taste and see that the Lord is good,
Mhm.
right? We are giving a taste, a foretaste of the day and the hour when justice is fully enacted, when and I mean both types of justice, right? The covenantal righteousness of God, and that which is right being done in terms of evil and wickedness. That is going to happen in the new creation when Jesus returns. And so we act justly, reflecting the goodness of God, not as an empty gesture that has no fruit, but we do it knowing that there is an actual destination
Yeah.
where every tear is dried and every wrong is made right.
Yeah.
Mhm.
It's also a takes the load off, the burden off of you. I feel
Yeah.
like a lot of times you can slip into I don't know if there's a term, like a savior complex.
Yes.
And you have to remind yourself like this, like we can't solve this.
Yeah.
Jesus already has solved it,
That's
and it
right.
will come
Yeah.
to fruition in the new creation. So I liked this episode a lot. It
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
good. All right. Well, thank y'all so much for tuning in. If you haven't already, like and subscribe. Follow us on all the platforms. We're on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, here on YouTube, wherever you listen. So give us a follow. See ya.